hung around at home too long because I felt responsible, but really I wasn't. It's not my responsibility, their lives. It's each of our responsibility, our own life.
Should we talk about how you grew up?
Yes, I'm not sure I ever did
Round
grow up,
two.
but round two. We tried
We've
this
had
once
some
before.
technical difficulties.
We had. So I was just going to start before, when we were interrupted by technology, and explain, a bit of my family background, basically how I came to be here. And it really begins with looking at my parents, who were born nearly 100 years ago now. My mum was born in the late 1920s. She was pretty cagey about her age because she was older than Dad, and she never let on exactly how old she was. Every birthday she had was the 21st.
Genuinely, you guys didn't know how old
Genuinely.
she was.
Yep.
Did he know?
Until she died and we got a birth certificate.
Wow. Did your dad know?
He must have known, but he had to play the game. It was a harmless game.
And how much older was she?
Not just a few years. So he was born in 1931, and she must have been born in like 27, 28. I can't remember the exact date because she died about 15 to 16 years ago now. But so there was an age gap, but not a huge one, but it obviously weighed on her heavily. But it did, it just became a family joke. Every birthday she ever had, she was 21. Anyway, so she was born in far north Queensland in Mackay, which would have been, quite a distant, rough place 100 years ago. It's pretty remote even today. You've probably never been there, but it's far north Queensland. And a good Irish Catholic family. I never met her parents. Her father was a tragic alcoholic, and he died riding home one day on his bike from the pub. Fell over and hit his head, and that was the end of him. So he left Mum with her two sisters, and she had brothers who I never met. And then soon after that happened, her mother got cancer and died. So she was left to be brought up by her elder sister and the nuns in the Catholic Church, which I'm sure wasn't a great thing for a young woman.
How old were her parents when they died?
Pretty young. She was not an adult by any stretch, but she wasn't 8. Because we didn't know her age, I can't tell you, but as a young teenager. But she had older sisters who were good to her. When we grew up, we got to know them. But we never got to meet her brothers because they were older, and I think they were ruined by the war. They went to war and came back as just shattered, tragic people. So we never actually met them. So anyway, she had a pretty tough upbringing, and she didn't have parents, to love her basically or show her how to behave. So that was, I think, pretty hard. Now, she didn't really talk about it much, but that's what my sisters and I have pieced together from the conversations we've had with her and talking to her sisters. But anyway, they weren't very open about it. That's Mum. Now, Dad, he had a similarly unusual upbringing, not easy. So he was born in Ceylon, which is now Sri Lanka, in 1931. His parents were tea planters there. A little boy on a station in northern Ceylon, no other little boys to play with. And at 6, he was sent off to the hill school to board. So again, no real contact with his parents. Then the war intervened and he was put on a boat with his two sisters to England, where he stayed for the duration of the war, safe from what they thought would happen to Ceylon in the war, which never eventuated. So he was brought up without a family life, without really knowing, his parents. And again, his sisters. So it wasn't a great training ground for him for life. I don't think going to English boarding schools in the 1940s as a single young male was really good for your well-being.
And
So
his
that's
parents were English
English, yeah,
originally.
originally. He went back to Ceylon, but Ceylon became an independent colony in the 50s, and so they left, and my grandfather decided to go to Tasmania because it was like a little piece of England, and they bought a small dairy and cropping farm, and he went there with them and with his sisters. And he worked with his father, who he didn't have a great relationship with because he was a pretty distant, typical Englishman. I think he was an only child himself who was brought up by his maiden aunt, so he didn't have a great family background either. You know, and it was quite odd because, not odd, even in the 50s, he would plough the fields with a draft horse and they'd clear the stumps with dynamite. It was all pretty simple stuff, but he soon got sick of that. And he got on his motorbike and went up north and wound up in Mackay, where he met my mum. And they fell in love and they decided to get married. But the Catholic priest wouldn't marry them because he was a Protestant and she was a Catholic. So they had a few goes at it, and in the end, the priest did marry them on the back of a promise that any children they had would be brought up as Catholics.
This is great that
Anyway,
you know all this. How do you know
well,
it?
because my sisters and I have workshopped it over the years. My older sister's 18 months older, my younger sister's 18 months younger, and when we get to bits of my story, you'll see that we sort of clung to each other through the early parts of our lives and became very close. And we just talk about what happened and try and understand why. Not that anything too bad happened, but
Yeah.
yeah. Anyway, look.
Have you written
So
some of this stuff down?
uh, when I was waiting for you, I jotted a chronology because I wanted to get it right.
Amazing.
Mm.
Okay.
So anyway, we're now we're in the late 50s, and my sister was born in Tasmania, where mum and dad were living with his parents unhappily, and then I came along, and that got too difficult, so they left, went to Ballarat, where dad was managing a farm, and my younger sister was born. And he pretty soon realised that you couldn't sustain a family, on a farm manager's wage. So he came to Melbourne. We lived in Caulfield, um, and got a job, studied, and became a valuer and worked in a um, city-based real estate practice and managed some of those big city buildings. So more strength to his army. He did what he had to do to support his family. So we wound up in Caulfield. I think we live in two places there. I can remember the names: Dover Street, Sycamore Street. And I went to um, Caulfield State School, so from prep to grade 2, I think. And I used to walk to school about a kilometre on my own, because in those days you could do that without fear. And my sisters went to the local Catholic school. Um, we had a pretty normal life there, just uh, again, because mum and dad weren't from Melbourne, dad was not in fact from Australia, they didn't have friends. Anne and Fee and I had each other, but we didn't really have mates over because you're too young, and they didn't have family friends to introduce us to people. So we were just a little tight-knit family group doing what people did in the early 60s, nothing extraordinary. Your dad would read us stories at night, Rudyard Kipling and what's that Rider Haggard book? King Solomon's Mines, and He taught us the Lord's Prayer, but the Church of English version, not the Catholic, whatever it is. I'm not even sure what it is. You could probably tell me.
Our Father.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, so that was our childhood in Caulfield was just unexceptional, pretty normal, I think. Then he got enough money together and he bought a house in Glen Iris where we moved, and that was a good thing because I went to the local state school. My sisters went to the local Catholic school, but not for very long because my younger sister, um, she had sticky ear. I forget what it's called, but little kids can get fluid in their ear, like sticky glue, and they can't hear properly. So the nun's approach to her was to treat her like a bad girl, and they stuck her down the back of the class so she couldn't hear. Anyway, she came home one day with, and I've never forgotten this, these big red wheels on the back of her legs, and she was about 8, I think, and she'd been beaten with a cane duster because she wasn't paying attention in class. And my mother dragged my older sister and I down to this school with Fiona and pinned the ears back on the nuns and took the girls out of that school, and that was the end of their Catholic education. And they went to a Protestant school like I did, local state school. But Glen Iris was a good place to grow up. If you went to the local state school, all your mates lived around the corner. You could walk to their places of an evening, walk home with them, walk to school with them, spend the weekends kicking the footy in the park. It was actually a really good, safe place to be. So again, a fairly normal life, but Mum and Dad's relationship was becoming fractured because I think the stress of having 3 kids and not knowing how to manage a family because they'd never been in one didn't help. They drank a bit. It was
Did your
what
mum, was your
they both
mum
did.
working?
Yes, I should explain. My mum did work. She had to go and work because she had to, because the family needed money to do what families do. So they were both working. So it was a pretty hard life for them, I think. But, to their credit, they did the best that they could for us. They wound up sending the girls to a private school, and I stayed in the state school system until central school. But in the end, when I finished year 8, they didn't know where to send me. One of my mates was going to Wesley College, and it just so happened that my father was dealing with the school then on some property project they were looking at. I think they got about a deaf school or something next door. So he got me an interview, and I wound up going to Wesley, and the girls went to a school in South Yarra. So we all wound up with a good education. Mum and Dad
And
managed to
that was a result of your dad doing well enough.
well enough, and Mum going to work. So they basically gave up what was necessary to give us what we needed. So they were good providers, and they loved us, but they were pretty hopeless, it's fair to say, because they just did not know what to do.
In terms of what?
Well, basically, we ran wild. And the girls were better than I was, although Anne had her moments too. But, I wound up doing some silly things with some silly people.
Like
But
what?
I'm not going to tell you. It's embarrassing. But it was pretty
What? Just
bad.
like graffitiing the school or like
Just
doing
silly
drugs?
things. No, I didn't do drugs. That wasn't my thing. Because, see, my parents drank, so the last thing I was going to do was to become dependent on that sort of thing. It just reckless things, dangerous things, but also damaging things, pointless. But luckily, the guys I hung out with in the end came from very good homes. They worked hard, they were clever, they were sporty. So I just fell into that life, which was good. But one of the good things that happened was when I was 9, I got given a second-hand Malvern Star bike for Christmas. And that gave me two things: freedom, because you could get on your bike and ride to school, go to your mate's house, go to footy training, cricket, swimming pool, Hedgeley Deans to go yabbying. It was terrific. So it gave me freedom, but it also gave me an income because I got a paper round, I think as a 9-year-old, delivering Sunday Observers early on a Sunday morning. And the deal was you got a sort of fixed amount for delivering the existing subscriptions. But if you sold new subscriptions, you got an upfront payment and a trailing commission for as long as the subscription was maintained. So you could actually make reasonable money as a 9-year-old anyway. And so the bike let me do that. And that was quite interesting because my round was Ashwood and Ashburton, and there's lots of housing commission places in that area. And I learnt pretty quickly that you don't go knocking on the doors of those houses at 7:30 on a Sunday morning because no one's too happy to see you. But anyway, there were still good people. I learnt to knock on the right doors a bit later, and people signed up for that pretty terrible newspaper, and I was able to make a little bit of money as a kid. In those days, though, again, life was pretty simple. People still had their milk delivered by a horse and cart, and they'd leave the money under the mat for the milkman. They'd also have their bread delivered, same sort of arrangement. And the butcher would drop the meat off and pick the money up out of the letterbox. So it was a very different place to what it is today, because that wouldn't work, because the money would be gone. In fact, I used to deliver all around that area that Barry Humphries' characters that Sandy Stone talks about: Gallipoli Boulevard and Victory Parade, Welfare Parade, all through Ashwood and Ashburton. So that kind of brings me to the end of my time at Glenaris, I think. I was about 12, I suppose. I've lost track of the years. Anyway, I wound up at Central School, and then I went to Wesley, and that was a good place. I got good enough marks, and despite wanting to be a marine biologist, I became a lawyer simply because I had the marks to do it. How much more do you want to know?
Yeah, whatever you want to tell me.
Well, that gets me to when I'm 17, I think. I used to work in a bottle shop, actually, during secondary school to earn pocket money. That was the other thing I did, up in Ashburton, Highway Cellars. So when I finished school, I kept on working there. I took a year off school, earned some money, bought a combi van, and drove it up north I worked, I think, from January to like June or July, and then I bought the combi van and went away and came back just before university started in the following March. And that was a good thing to do. None of my mates did anything like that. They all went off, started their courses at uni. So I was a year behind all of them, but that didn't matter because I'd had that year and I owned a combi van.
You just went on your own?
No, I went with a girlfriend. Came back, studied, did all right, nothing extraordinary about university days, like everybody. Worked. I did stay at home. My sister had left by then, but I don't know, I kind of thought that someone had to stay at home to make sure that mum and dad didn't go off the rails, which in hindsight was not a good decision for me anyway, and probably was unnecessary for them, but I guess I was a bit worried about it.
What were you worried about?
Well, you know, they drank, they were pretty unstable, so sort of managing them. And I think one of the reasons why we're having the second chat is because of what I told you happened to my father one night when I came home from being out. I've been thinking about it. I can't remember how old I was, but I think I was a late teenager. I think I drove home that night, came home sort of around midnight. And I came down the side of the house and I noticed that his car was running. And, he had a hose coming out of the exhaust pipe and he had it stuck in his window and he was, he'd given up on life. He was trying to kill himself. But I just happened by at the right moment and dragged him out and he was okay. But the strange thing was he never talked about it again. He never mentioned it. He never said thank you or you shouldn't have done it. He just pretended it never happened. But that was kind of the English way. You never talked about stuff. You just buried it, kept it hidden, like nothing had happened.
And how were you feeling?
Well, I have never really talked about it much. I've told a few people, not too many, but because of the I was pretty resilient. I had to be, yeah, just
Did
resilient.
you talk did you talk to your mum or sisters about it?
My sisters, not my mum,
Why not your mum?
because I didn't really have a great relationship with either of them, my parents. I respected what they'd done for us. They provided a house and sent us to school and worked hard to do all of that. But because of their family of origin, they weren't well adapted to, dealing with emotional things. Not that they didn't love us, but they just didn't know what to do. So the last thing I would ever do would be to approach them with something like that. I think they wouldn't know what to do or say.
So would they talk to you about any emotional stuff or like hug
No,
you
because
or
they didn't have any of that in their lexicon because of where they'd come from. You know, they hadn't had family lives and loving parents, for they were not present. In Mum's case, because they died, in Dad's case, because he was away from them.
did you eat together?
Yeah, no, we did. We had it was a relatively functional family like that. Certainly, when we were small, it was good. When we were in our middle years and our teens, it was terrible. And then we left.
How was it terrible? Like they would just be drunk.
Yeah, but, if you've ever, it's hard to describe really, but they were functioning alcoholics, I suppose. But that doesn't mean the times were good.
You just didn't know what you were walking into
That's right.
on any
There's
given
just
day.
great uncertainty. So my approach was just to get on with what I was doing. I played footy, saw my friends, worked hard. I would sit in my room, every night and study. It was an escape, but it's also something I like to do. So I just got on with things. That's all you can do.
And
But
you
I was
and your
lucky. I
sisters
was lucky
looked after
because I
each
had
other.
good friends. And my sisters and I have a very good relationship and we helped each other. But good friends help, because they came from stable families and they sort of set the standard, if you like. They led you to where you should go.
And did they or their parents have any awareness of what was going on at home for you?
No, because my parents. didn't have a relationship with my friends' parents. They knew who they were, but they weren't friends.
And were you open about it? Because I guess
Not really. Young men aren't.
you saw, yeah. So
Not then, anyway.
you saw other families and thought, okay, my family isn't like this.
That's right.
So you knew kind of there was something dysfunctional,
Hmm. But there isn't a
but you
family
just
that...
kind of, well, yeah, every family has
That's right.
issues.
That's right. So I don't think I'm special, or it was terrible, or it was, anything. It just was. And most families have an element of that. Certainly, I've learnt that as I've grown older. But obviously, I did have friends I would talk to who had seen part of what was going on, but just a couple.
And did they ever see it, or you wouldn't bring
They did,
people on?
yeah. I didn't have people back a lot, but some of them saw it, yeah. Yep, I
Was
couldn't
there
believe
any,
it.
what do you mean?
Well, because their families weren't like that and we were young, to them it was extraordinary.
Like to see someone drunk?
Well, it wasn't just drunk, it was the whole sort of... It's more than that. It's hard to describe. You have to be present when it's happening. But one good friend came up to... when I was up in my combi van driving around Northern Australia, he came up with my parents who rented a place, I think at Surface, and I drove there and met him. So he spent some time with us there, and there was just a couple of bad days that he had to live through, and he had a really good understanding at that point of what was going on. I think we were 18. Yeah.
Was there
And he had an
any,
inkling anyway.
was there violence or anything like
There
that?
was... You've seen drunken people and how they behave.
Directed at you?
Just random. It doesn't make any sense. It's not particularly targeted at anyone. It's just bad.
From both your parents?
Yeah, from both. Surely you've seen friends of yours who've drunk too much and lost their cools.
Yeah.
Yeah, just like that. But it's just more
Okay.
regular than it should.
Would they drink every day?
Every day, yeah.
Together? Like, would it,
To, mm,
so it would begin like at some kind of social thing and then,
I don't think Mum had to wait for Dad to
or
come
not
home to
even that?
start.
Hmm.
I don't think Mum had to wait for Dad to come home to start. I know she didn't.
Yeah. And did you know if they were depressed, or do you think your dad was depressed?
He was, for sure, certainly. And so was Mum. They both were.
And I guess,
Well, the
yeah, there
inter-
was no other family around
that's right, no
and
family,
you
no
guys were
family friends.
kids.
We just had each other. But, it was tragic for them, but they had a choice like all of us. They could have chosen not to be like that.
Yeah, but they would have needed help to
Well,
break the addiction and
true,
to,
but with almost anything, obviously not cancer or, you know, a heart problem, but with things that involve your emotional state, unless, of course, it's hormonally driven, I suppose, you can choose a path. You know, the depression could
Yeah.
be genetic. That's hard to deal with, but it can also be a result of your life's experience, which I expect it was for my parents. So they could choose how to respond to it.
Yes, but you need a lot of help, and it's really hard because you get trapped in this way of thinking to get to the point. Yeah, because there's a lot of it, because I've experienced this hopelessness where it just seems too hard to go on. And there's a lot of people on this, not a lot, but that now have been a fair few people on this podcast talking about their own experience of hopelessness and going to the point of trying to end their life. And obviously that's what happened to my brother. It's like you don't, it's so overpowering. You don't see any options. There's no other. You're really like, this is the only remaining solution. That's one thing. And then, but that's kind of, yeah, your thoughts are so overpowering. Then with addiction, it's like it's so powerful. Like it can be so powerful. So it's not like you can just break it one day. So you can get help and support, but it's like that has to be available. And yeah, you have to be willing to say, I'm struggling and I need help, which can be hard for people to do, which I think was your point with your dad, like not speaking about it. But I think that's the hard thing with alcohol, right? Because if it was a illicit substance, for example, it would be clear that there's a problem. But with alcohol, people can make it like, oh, that's normal. What's wrong with getting drunk once in a while? Like you're some teetotal or something if you don't think it's like it's just social and fun. When it's like, no, it's a massive problem for some people.
No, I know that as well as anybody, but I still think those things are choices you make. See, the only way an alcoholic can stop being an alcoholic is to decide to do something about it. Only they can do that, right? It's a choice. I'm not saying it's an easy one, but it's up to them.
Yeah.
That's the same with most things. But different, you know, if it's embedded into your genes, it's very hard to change that. Probably impossible. You have to speak to someone who knows a lot more about it than me.
Well, I think it's just from my understanding, it's a predisposition. Oh yeah, so the genetic thing is if anyone's stressed or overworked or whatever, or not getting enough sunlight or not eating properly or not exercising, some kind of something will go wrong, and it could be a physical ailment. But if you have the genetic thing for depression, then it's likely to show up like as depression.
Well,
so that's
I've got myself
that's
in mind,
my
maybe, you know. Yeah, in my 40s, I was fat, angry, and depressed and didn't know why. Then I worked out why, and I stopped being those things because I decided I didn't want to be that person. So you can do it.
Yeah. So that's my thing now, is that I need to decide to be happy. That's what I realized. It's like, okay, choose not to be happy, but I want to not keep being depressed. So it's like, how do I change my life? And it's not like a magic pill, whatever.
Well, they can
But
give
it's
you those,
like,
of course.
okay, yeah, whether they work or not is another
No,
thing.
I had a daughter who was struggling, and they put her on those things. I didn't think it was a good idea, but she's worked it out. She's dug herself out of the pit of despair. I really admire her for it too.
But yeah, I think it is, um, yeah, I think it is a choice, but it's not easy. So then you have to
No, it's not
make it
easy.
known to people that if you want to change, like for example, how did you turn your life around?
I just realised I was fat, angry, and depressed, and I thought, well, I can change some of these things. I can eat better. I can start exercising like I used to, and I can find people to delegate work I'm overborn with, because that was part of the problem. We were talking before about the problems I had during my marriage, and I worked out what was going on there, and that helped. And you can work out the things that are impacting you in a bad way, and learn to deal with them. But exercise is really important in that, and also finding time to do things for yourself, not just making yourself a slave to work or even your family.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah,
But
I
that was, and
think
that
my so but how long was that kind of transformation for you?
like some few years. It's still going on, I guess. But yeah,
But
some some few years.
do you feel like it was a turning point? Like there was a
Yes, I
moment
decided.
where you were like, I'm going to change.
I just decided I was sick of being fat, angry, and depressed. So I started eating better, dieting, exercising again. As I said, I started finding people at work, or finding people, younger people who I could delegate work to. That took a long time, not just a few years. That's ongoing. And then I realised I didn't have much outside of the family work, so I started riding my bike with a group of people, like we've discussed, um, in another setting, and that was a great thing because it keeps you fit. You're in a beautiful environment. You get to travel. You make an incredible amount of friends, and that that group of people, which includes your dad, are very close knit and supportive of each other, and it's just so healthy for everybody, not just physically, but you know, your mental well health is enhanced.
Mm,
Whatever they say about old men in lycra.
mm. But was it like a straight line, just stuff getting better, or it's like there were like ups and downs along the way?
Of course, there are ups and downs. Yeah, but
And with
not on the getting fit front. That's pretty simple. Just eat better and exercise. That was the easy bit.
huh,
But but with that comes a better state of mind. You're happier. You feel better about yourself. You've taken time to do something you like. You know, the hiccups are always work. You know, because you still get overloaded, and can be oppressive. But that's all right. You learn how to deal with that too. And then the family relationship. Well, that was just a seesaw. But life's not perfect. You just got to learn to get on with it. Be resilient.
and there was a never a point after you started where you were like, I'm just going to go back to being fat and
No,
angry.
that was it. Gone. The kids will tell you I'm a bit grumpy at times.
How old were you when you made this decision?
In my early 40s.
Mm. Yeah, my brother just sent me something that said the six best doctors in the world are sunlight, rest, exercise, diet, self-confidence, and friends.
See, I think I've talked about each one of those.
Well,
I,
what about the self-confidence bit? Or you
but
already
that
had that?
comes, I, I did, but certainly when you lose weight, get fit, you feel better about yourself. When you realise that you're not grumpy, you feel better about yourself, right? So you become more confident. And the other thing I did, I started saying yes to things. Like I used to say, no, I'm too busy. No, 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 no. So I said yes to things, a whole bunch of things that I was previously wouldn't have. And that was really good. And one of the things I did a few years later, I lost track of when, probably in my early 50s, I decided to work, earning money 80% of the year, and then I'd spend 20% of the year doing other things, mostly charitable stuff. And I've done that probably for 10 or more years now, 12 years probably. And that was good. That made me feel better about myself too.
So does that mean you take like a whole month off to do that?
No, no, I just say, I'm in a law practice and you have equity, you have 100% or 50%. And I just said, look, I'd like to give up 20% of my equity and just work only 80% of the year so I can do other things. And I do deals, so there are times when you work for 3 months straight and then you might have, a quiet time. So in the quiet time, I can go off and do other things. But it doesn't quite work like that. Instead of having an 80-20 split, it's probably 120% now, but it doesn't matter. I get to do things that are, I think, worthwhile.
Mm-hmm. Like the rock art.
Like the rock art up in the Kimberley, that organisation, Batia, that I've been talking to your dad about, that he's helping me with, um, and lots of other things. I've done quite a bit of stuff for people. My partner, Brendan Keeler, who was shot and killed in the city, I helped his wife with his best friend for some years. You know, I've just done stuff for people.
Did that have a big impact on you?
It did actually. I'm not, yeah, but yeah, but that's her story, not mine. She doesn't like to talk about
Mm.
it. Mm.
How old were you?
I don't know, but Brendan was 43. I think his wife was 40, so I was probably 50.
And so do you have this sense that if you could turn your life around, like why weren't your parents able to do that?
That's right. They had a choice, and I
And
don't
did you?
blame them. I feel really sorry for them actually, because I think I understand why it happened. They didn't have, it wasn't easy for them. I was lucky because I wound up in a nice middle class suburb, Glen Iris, going to a good local state school with a bunch of, you know, good friends who came from good families. So I had a community and a family, bigger than my own. And I had two sisters who were close to me, so I had a lot more than they did.
Mm.
So I'm fortunate. They weren't so fortunate. So it would be much harder for them. They were alone, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's what I want to do in my life, but also with this podcast, like, so that people see it is possible to make a change because other people have done it and been, obviously no one's situation's the same, but for example, the episode I had last week, this amazing guy who I met, so he was I'd never met him, but the pest guy introduced me to him, and he ended up, we just ended up, I went to Kent, 2 hours away by the seaside, and we sat down and he told me his story over 2.5 hours, where he was addicted to cocaine, drinking like every day. And he was being abused physically by his girlfriend. And he tried to kill himself twice. And he talks about, I won't, his story's there so anyone can go and listen to it. And I don't need to speak on his behalf. But yeah, he talks about this moment where it's a choice, where he was like, I can't keep doing this. But he also does talk about, it's like there's two parts of you. There's one part that's like, you're worthless, just end it, like, just do it. But then there's another voice that's like, don't, like, keep going. So yeah, so hard to talk about.
But I don't understand. Someone who's fried their brain with coke and a lot of grog, they've changed physical things about the way they're wired, haven't they?
But he was able to turn his life around. It was 10 years. So he talks about this moment of making a choice, that he's not going to keep doing it. And it was 10 years. And now he helps because on his journey of like therapy and all the help he got, he noticed all of the people were women, and he felt like he now wants to give back to and help men who feel like, because he wanted, to talk to someone who could understand the environments that he'd been in, like masculine environments. So that's what he does now. So but I think you have to know that it's possible, right? And so I hope that's what,
but it is possible.
Yeah. But your parents probably, maybe they didn't know. Or what I would want it to be is so that, obviously it's not, it's too late for your parents, because, is your dad still alive?
No, they're both dead.
No. Yeah.
But
for that situation, again, so that they know, like, that you can turn your life around. It's not going to be easy. Like, yes, you've had like, it's horrible what happened, to your mum. You lost both parents. Your life hasn't been easy. But you can break
my life's been fine.
Your mum.
No, they had hard lives, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
But see, in the end, so mum got grandkids. My kids and my sister's kids, and that was her second lease of life, right? So she actually, because she got sick, she stopped drinking. So she, in the end, cleaned her act up, because she knew that if she wanted to be with the grandkids, she had to, be a good grandma. So in the end, she was fine, and Dad just sort of, that made him better too. And hang on, I got to plug my phone in. You still there?
Yeah.
Anyway, so they wound up okay, and then it's a good story actually. My mum died first, and Dad was an old single man, reserved, typical Englishman, not too many friends, certainly didn't speak to anyone, and he just literally had nowhere to go, nothing to do. So my sisters and I looked after him on a sort of rotating basis. Not that he was too old to get on with his life. He was just shattered by Mum's death. And then his girlfriend from Tasmania from 50 years ago rang him up one day and said, Donald, and she lived in Moree and he's living in Melbourne, and they met in Tasmania when they were in their 20s. So she clearly held a candle for him for a long time because it was 50 years. And she said, look, I don't mean to break into your life so late in the piece, and for all I know you're married. He said, no, my wife died a year ago. And she said, oh, so did my husband. Do you mind if I see you? And so he said, of course. And so she came down from Moree and saw him, and they had a relationship that lasted 15 years. And it was a good relationship. They slept together. They went overseas, back to Ceylon, to England. They actually had a really good second lease of life. So the
Wow.
story ends well for them too.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I
you never
remember
give
you
up
told
hope.
me that.
Never give up hope.
So, and so at that point, your dad was better. How did he get better?
Well, his old girlfriend, she used to be, I think, a headmistress. She was pretty formidable type, so she just wouldn't stand for any nonsense.
But he must not have been like, how did he start getting better after that day you found him, or he stayed?
No, he stayed like that until he was very old and the grandkids came and my mum got better. He sort of fell into line. Not when Mum died, he relapsed, but then when Pat turned up, his old girlfriend, she just helped him, dig himself out of the hole.
Mm.
Have you read that book
When he was
by
about
Cormac
70 or
in his
something.
70s? Yeah, 70, late 60s, 70. They had more than 10 years, less than 15 together. Have you read The Road by Cormac McCarthy?
Mm.
It's a pretty bleak book, but it's a book about hope. It shows you how, no matter how bleak and desperate things can get, people have a tendency to still look for a good result, and will probably get one if they keep doing that.
So I guess though he stayed alive after that day you found him. So maybe do you think there was a sense that he wanted to stay around for you guys, or he felt?
No, look, no, he was pretty troubled. He wound up, he did try again. He wound up in care in some place where they did terrible things with drugs, I think. He was troubled.
Mm,
But I don't know all that
yeah.
history because it was sort of kept from us.
Hmm. Because it was seen as
People just didn't talk
not.
about things like that.
Mm, yeah. Well, I don't think
But
that's
it was
helpful.
just a few minutes in my life and his. It wasn't defining, I don't think,
Mm.
in the end. I mean, it could have been for him, obviously.
But for you, it wasn't because you kind of knew how turbulent things were.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you could fall into despair and follow the road they chose, or you could get on with your own life,
Mm.
which is what you have
Mm.
to do. And as I said, the only mistake I made was I hung around at home too long because I felt responsible, but really I wasn't. It's not my responsibility. Their lives. It's It's each of our responsibility, our own life.
And how did you come to that realization?
Don't know. I just did.
And at some point you decided to move out.
Yeah.
Yeah. The podcast I'm releasing today is Chris Snowden, he's a real liberal, probably almost, yeah, libertarian. He works for a free market think tank, and he's really on the alcohol, smoking, sugar type, like the government shouldn't, he's anti-paternalism, so the government shouldn't tell people what to do and shouldn't have all these
I'm on your side.
restrictions. And people should be treated like adults, and then they can figure out for themselves about drinking and drugs as well. Drugs shouldn't have been. There should never have been a war on drugs, and
the counterpoint is, of course, that they can become a massive burden on the health system, which we fund, and that's not fair.
Yeah, but I guess I'm trying to figure it out because I have these values where I do think it's the best thing is that people have individual responsibility and can be, in control of their own lives and make decisions for themselves. But I guess you really need education, so people know. Yeah, so people know about the potential harmful effects, and then you need to make sure there's also education about where to get help. I think because banning alcohol, because you could say, well, my parents were alcoholics and alcohol destroyed their lives, I want to ban it. But I guess that
I would never say that.
I know, but some people might say, or it might seem inconsistent that on one hand I have people on here talking about how like substances have destroyed their lives or badly damaged their lives, but then on the other hand I have been talking about like removing all restrictions. But I guess that's where the difference in values comes from. It's like, it's not for the government to tell you what you can and can't do. But it's to have the education. Well, yeah, the government, I guess, to educate you. And us to, well, it's not even the government. I guess it's us to support each other and that's why I think removing the shame. If someone's struggling, the shame, it just doesn't help. It makes it so much worse. It's okay. Yeah, but, if you end up addicted, that's okay. And you can get help and turn your life around.
But the shame comes because of some of the things they do. Stealing, well, stealing's the main one, I suppose. And often from people they love, dragging the people they love down with them. The shame's complicated, I suppose.
Yeah.
But it doesn't arise because they're shooting heroin. It arises because of the things they do in order to shoot heroin.
Yeah. But yeah, that's why this guy Dan's so amazing, because he talks completely honestly about what he did to feed his addiction, including stealing. And it's like, if you put this stuff into the light, like, that's bearing it just makes it worse. And it's like, we all, like, every single human has has these sides of ourselves and have potential to make mistakes and do bad things, but it doesn't mean you're a bad person.
No. Well, as I said, I did some silly things as a young person.
Yeah. I want to know what these silly things are.
I know you do.
I bet it's like graffitiing the train tracks.
Speculating doesn't help.
Which is like hardly the worst thing. Okay. So it's really, were you always at peace with it, or did you ever have like anger and resentment towards
No, I was
your
angry,
parents?
yeah. Of course I was. When you're young and you can't work it out, it doesn't seem fair, but you grow old and you realise it's not about fairness. Life isn't fair. But how you respond to it is what counts.
This is such a motivational conversation for me to get out of this
Good.
slump I'm in. It's funny though, because you kept talking about getting fit, and that's the one thing that I am already fit. So it's like, okay, my diet is terrible though, so I can probably
Yeah,
change
that
that.
can play a big role.
Yeah, I think all the sugar can't be good
The
for
sugar's
my
bad, yeah.
mood.
Or your
And then
sleep.
probably I'll have to. I sleep a lot,
Right, I don't. But we're very different ages.
and the sunlight. I probably have to come back to Melbourne to get some.
Well, that would be good. You come and I'll tell you those naughty things that I did.
Um. Okay. Wait. So how did you let go of the anger? Or it just happened gradually. Like what?
Yeah, just getting older, becoming wiser.
Do you think was there part of it when you made that change when you were 40,
Yeah, yeah, that's yes, for sure.
letting go a lot of stuff,
Mm.
and that was after the end of your marriage as well,
No,
or
no, no. That was when I realised there were problems. I was married for many more years after that.
mm-hmm. Yeah. Um. Okay. Is there anything else you want to say?
No, I think I said too much.
When? I have this poster here. I should have it in this room that says undersharing is the greater risk.
Right. Well, I've been guilty of that a lot, but not in my later years. Can't see the point.
Mm.
That's why I rang you back and did this again. I felt like I was
Yeah.
cheating. Mm.
Yeah. And I mean, what's in here that you would feel like it's saying too much?
Just talking about my parents, I guess.
Mm.
Yeah, it doesn't seem honourable, but I don't think I'm dissing them because I think they did a good job according to their own lights. We had a safe home. We were loved. We got educated. We turned out okay, and that's in large part to them, but also the environment that we lived in with friends, and that helped a lot too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you love your parents and care about them. You're
Mm,
just saying that they weren't able to make a change in their life, but
correct.
you were able to do that. So,
Because I had
and
a better
now
environment
you've,
than they did. Because I had my sisters, I had my friends, I had their families, the friends' there was a lot more going on. I wasn't alone.
yeah, and now you're doing work. Well, you've now shown that good example to your children.
They're all fine. The younger one struggled, as I told you, but she's worked her way through that. She's really good.
And you're helping, you're working with this mental health charity, which is all
Mm,
about talking openly. So you're now in alignment with what they're doing by you sharing
Well,
this story.
yes, that's a new thing, but I think it's a really worthwhile organisation. The thing I spent most time with is that sort of more esoteric stuff in the Kimberley with the rock art. But it's just good to do things for other people that are different to what you spend hours at work doing, I think.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. So, I mean, it sounds like you have compassion for your parents. I don't think you're dishonoring them.
Good. I'm pleased to hear you say that.
And I think I just think it's so important because, people, you're not the only one who grew up with alcoholic parents. So for other people
No,
to hear this is really helpful. Like you're doing a lot of good just by talking about it.
that's the hope. Just by the way, I mean, I've always thought that I've been very lucky. I feel like I'm a lucky person. Things have gone well.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. You don't come across as it doesn't come across like you're complaining about your life. Not at all.
Good.
So
I'm
you
not.
don't, you don't need to worry about that. This is not the mainstream media or whatever that goes on in Australia where
No,
you
I understand. I
don't
don't
get a
mind.
voice based on certain, you know, gender or racial characteristics. Everyone's allowed to tell their story on this platform.
Understood.
Okay. Should we finish with. So, what? You already told me the book, which is John Steinbeck?
That was the log of the Sea of Cortez. That's what made me want to be a marine biologist. Um, the the book I referred to before was The Road by Cormac McCarthy, which is a pretty bleak book, but in the end, when you think about it, it's actually a book about hope. Um, I'm actually reading one of his books now, The Passenger. I only just started it. He's a great writer. He's well into his 80s. He's probably America's greatest living writer. He
Mm.
wrote All the Pretty Horses, The Cities of the Plain, um, Suttree, The Road. What was that one? The way it made it into a film, brutal film. Anyway, I recommend him to anyone.
Okay. And should we just end with the three? Because I know your mindfulness type practice is cycling, being on the
Yep,
bike.
being on the bike.
So, should we end with the three words that describe the best version of you?
Oh God, I can't do that. I don't have enough insight into me. You're asking the wrong person.
No, I mean like who you want to show up as.
I want to show up as me, but I don't know what that
Okay.
is necessarily.
We, people say stuff like honest, generous,
Well, clearly honest.
hardworking. I don't think
Um,
anyone says hardworking. Yeah.
no, honest.
Industrious is what Dad said.
Honesty is the most important thing. Well, not the most. One of the most important things. Um, Empathy is vital. Vital, I think, because without it, you can't have a good relationship with other people. Yeah, empathies. So honesty, empathy, well, and just being happy.
Perfect.
Hmm.
Okay. Thanks so much.
It's a pleasure.